They told him quitting was weakness, that a man who walks away from his job walks away from his worth, but nobody told him that the day a broke single father shut his laptop for the last time would be the day a black luxury SUV stopped outside his crumbling house, and the most powerful CEO in the city knocked on his door and said, "I accepted you quitting, but I never accepted losing you, and if you believe real power, real loyalty, and real love only exist in fairy tales, stay with this story until the end, because what happens next will change how you see sacrifice forever." And before we begin, hit subscribe now, because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind you who you are when the world tries to break you. When Daniel Mercer quit his job, it wasn't dramatic, there was no shouting, no slammed doors, no heroic speeches about dignity, only a quiet click as he shut down his computer at 6:17 a.m. while his 7-year-old daughter Lily slept on the couch behind him with her school uniform folded neatly beside her. Because Daniel had learned the hardest lesson of adulthood early, that dignity doesn't pay rent and passion doesn't feed children, and yet even knowing that, he still quit, because the job he had once loved had become a slow suffocation, 12-hour days at a fast-growing logistics startup that worshipped productivity while quietly punishing humanity, and Daniel had been the best operations manager they had ever had, the one who fixed broken systems, saved failing departments, and answered calls at midnight, but none of that mattered when Lily got sick for the third time in 2 months and his request to leave early was met with a cold message from HR reminding him of commitment expectations, and that was the moment something broke inside him, because he remembered his late wife Emma whispering years ago in a hospital room that time was the only currency you never got back, and so Daniel typed a simple resignation email, thanked them for the opportunity, and pressed send, not knowing that somewhere across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the river, the company's CEO hadn't yet read the message that would haunt her for months. Daniel's life had already been stripped down to essentials, a small rented house with peeling paint, a second-hand car that stalled in winter, mornings filled with cereal boxes and rushed hugs, nights filled with spreadsheets and worry, but he never let Lily see the fear, because single fathers learn to hide storms behind smiles, and the day after he quit, he packed Lily's lunch himself, walked her to school holding her hand like he always did, and told her everything would be okay even though he had no idea how, and as he watched her disappear through the school gates, he felt the full weight of unemployment settle on his chest like a physical thing, heavy and relentless, because the world is far less forgiving to men who stop earning, and Daniel knew that within weeks the savings would thin, within months the house would be at risk, and yet there was also a strange calm inside him, a quiet pride, because for the first time in years, he had chosen presence over promotion. What Daniel didn't know was that his resignation didn't vanish into an inbox graveyard like most others, because the company had recently been shaken by sudden failures, missed deadlines, and operational chaos, and when the CEO, Eleanor Whitmore, finally scanned the weekly departure list late one night, Daniel's name hit her like a blow, because Daniel wasn't just another employee, he was the man who had silently kept her empire standing while she stood on stages talking about vision, and as Eleanor dug deeper, pulling performance reports, old emails, internal notes, she realized with growing unease that the systems she praised as self-sustaining had in fact been sustained by one exhausted man who never asked for credit, and the more she read, the more unsettled she became, because this wasn't a resignation driven by greed or disloyalty, this was the resignation of someone who had finally been pushed too far. 3 weeks after quitting, Daniel was counting coins on the kitchen table when the knock came, sharp, deliberate, out of place in a neighborhood where nobody knocked unless something was wrong, and for a moment he didn't answer, because anxiety teaches you to fear unexpected sounds, but then Lily called from the other room asking who it was, and Daniel stood, straightened his worn sweater, and opened the door to a scene that felt unreal, a tall woman in a tailored coat standing beside a black SUV, her expression controlled but her eyes searching, and Daniel didn't recognize her at first, because power often looks ordinary without a stage, until she spoke his name and he felt the ground shift beneath him, because this was Eleanor Whitmore, the CEO whose emails people feared, standing on his doorstep like a visitor asking forgiveness rather than a boss demanding obedience. Eleanor didn't apologize right away, because she wasn't used to apologizing, but she spoke carefully, explaining how the company had unraveled after he left, how systems failed, teams clashed, deadlines collapsed, and how for the first time she had been forced to look beyond dashboards and metrics to see the human cost beneath them, and Daniel listened in silence, because listening had been his survival skill for years, and when she finally said the words that would echo in his mind forever, that she had accepted his quitting but never intended to lose him, Daniel laughed, not out of joy but disbelief, because the world had a way of realizing your value only after it had discarded you. What Eleanor didn't expect was Daniel's refusal, calm and unwavering, because Daniel had reached a point where money alone could no longer buy his silence, and he told her that no job was worth missing bedtime stories, no salary worth watching his daughter grow up through photos, and Eleanor felt something unfamiliar then, a crack in the armor of success she had built her life around, because she had sacrificed marriages, friendships, and health in the name of growth, and standing in Daniel's modest living room with Lily peeking shyly from behind the hallway wall, Eleanor saw the life she had convinced herself was impossible, and in that moment, the negotiation stopped being about a job and became about a choice. Instead of offering a raise, Eleanor offered something radical, a restructured role with full autonomy, flexible hours, and decision-making power that matched Daniel's actual impact, but more than that, she offered accountability, promising to rebuild a company culture that didn't devour the very people who made it succeed, and Daniel didn't answer immediately, because trust once broken doesn't heal with words, but as Eleanor prepared to leave, Lily stepped forward and asked if the lady was the reason her dad had been sad lately, and the question landed harder than any boardroom confrontation ever could, and Eleanor realized then that leadership wasn't proven in quarterly earnings but in moments like this, where humility mattered more than authority. Daniel returned to the company on his own terms, not as a savior but as a partner, and the changes were slow, resisted, criticized, because people who thrive in broken systems fear repair, but Daniel persisted, building teams instead of burning them, mentoring quietly, listening deeply, and Eleanor watched as productivity rose not through pressure but through trust, and in the months that followed, the company didn't just recover, it transformed, becoming a case study in sustainable leadership, and Daniel's name was finally spoken in rooms where it had never been mentioned before. But the greatest shift wasn't professional, it was personal, because Daniel no longer came home hollowed out, no longer missed school plays, no longer measured his worth by exhaustion. The final twist came a year later when Eleanor publicly credited Daniel not just with saving the company but with saving her, because she admitted that his resignation had forced her to confront the cost of her ambition, and in front of shareholders and employees alike, she announced a profit-sharing and family-first policy that sent shockwaves through the industry, and Daniel stood at the back of the room holding Lily's hand, realizing that quitting hadn't been an ending at all but a boundary, and boundaries, when drawn with courage, have the power to reshape entire worlds. And as Daniel tucked Lily into bed that night, she asked if quitting was bad, and Daniel smiled and told her the truth, that quitting what breaks you can sometimes be the bravest thing you'll ever do. And somewhere across the city, Eleanor Whitmore looked out over the skyline knowing that the greatest success of her career hadn't been built in a boardroom, but on the day she knocked on a single father's door and chose not to lose him.